Okay, it's Thursday, June 26th at 6:30 PM. This is a regular scheduled meeting of the Woodland Park Planning Commission today as a workshop. First item is a call to order, which I'm doing now, and roll call.
Sure. Chair Lee Brown,
Here.
Vice Chair Larry Larson,
Here.
Don DeZello,
Here.
Ken Hertzfield,
Here.
Don Hoyne,
Here.
Ken Kennedy,
Here.
Jared Newcomb.
Here.
And then also we have in attendance from the Board of Adjustment, Chair Jim Rumsey, and Board of Adjustment member Valerie Lundy. From planning staff, CJ Gates, and myself, Karen Schmink. And then online, we have our consultant, Jennifer Gardner, with Logan Simpson. So that's where we are tonight.
I will do the pledge.
To the States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
That puts it back to you, Karen.
Okay, tonight's topic is yet again our favorite, our land use code update. And Jen and I, as we were preparing for tonight's session, we were joking that it's kind of like Christmas and we got the package under the tree. And tonight we're going to help you like rattle it a little and kind of sniff it and get a feel for what's in there. It's taken once you dive in and see like all the detail and stuff, there's just so much that goes into preparing this kind of a document. And I know many of you all have had a variety of jobs either now or previously that were highly detail oriented. So I know you're familiar with trying to sort out that level of detail and how things interconnect and intertwine. And so our purpose tonight is to give you kind of an orientation to the document, so you have a better feel of when we do get it to you. Our goal is definitely from hell or high water. I don't know how late Jen and I are staying tomorrow, but we're getting this out. Just because it's more than time to get it to you. There are things in there that you will see that you'll be going, oh, this needs to be fixed. We recognize that. Just flag it. We'll keep working through it. But I think it's way more right than it is off at this point. And just to keep the project moving, we definitely needed to get it into your hands. And you guys have demonstrated over the past, 2.5 years, your level of attention to detail and commitment to this project. We've had some players change. So we're counting on you to help us kind of work some of those bugs out and identify those things. So we just decided to embrace your talents. So with that, let's go to that next slide, Jen. So as a disclaimer, this is a work product for review. And for this review committee, we do not yet have something where we're comfortable unveiling it to the entire community. So that's why it has that work product designation. And our goal at this point is further refinement before it is sent off to our city attorney for legal review. And you guys were very insistent that that's definitely what you wanted to do. You wanted to take a look at this before that legal review happened. Steps after that legal review is that's when we integrate any comments from that legal review, and then we unveil it to the community through some type of open house. There's I'm estimating a 30-day window for the community as a whole to review, look at provide comment, those kind of things. After we get done with that review period, we look to reconcile those comments. We're looking at a possible joint work session between Planning Commission and City Council on the document itself, and then the public hearing process for adoption. With this type of an ordinance change, it does go through Planning Commission public hearing first for review, for recommendation, and then off to City Council for final adoption to be integrated into our municipal code. So what we are planning to send you is PDFs, so you can more easily search the document. And we're looking at doing this as one for each of the 7 chapters, so you can have multiple windows open. Our thinking was that if it was all in one document, it would be a bit onerous to scroll through 50 some odd pages to get to whatever section you're looking for. That if it's searchable, you should be able to use that search mechanism and connect back and forth between those various chapters.
Editable also?
A PDF editable, Jen? Because we still need the
Yes.
comments uploaded into Conveyo.
Yeah, but we need to be, when we're reviewing it, to be able to put comments and notes to ourselves on the electronic copy.
Say that again, Jen?
Say what you were just saying, Lee, that you need to put notes in an editable copy. I think, so typically a PDF file, when it comes to you have the ability to make comments in it. I'll do a couple of tests to make sure, because I use Adobe Acrobat and I know there's comment features in that, and I don't know if you just bring it up, without Adobe Acrobat, how you're able to make comments. But like Karen said, we do need you to translate those comments into Conveyo for us, either way. So
Yes, I think the critical thing is be able to cut and paste out of it, so we can, I imagine us cutting a snippet of section and say, I think this should be changed to that. And so rather than having to retype every piece that we want to make a comment on, if we could just snip it out and then paste that little snippet, the sentence or two into Conveyo, that would make things go a lot faster, a lot easier.
rework it. Yeah, that makes sense to me. I'll do a couple tests on my end to see if you can do that just straight. I know, like I said, with Acrobat, I can copy things out and edit them in another
Yeah.
format. But we'll see if that works for you all as well.
And like I said, I don't pay attention to what software I'm using, so I can't tell you if it's Adobe Acrobat Pro or some other version, or I think we determined I actually have a lesser version based on what my team is able to manipulate and I'm not. But I'm still able to like copy text out of there and then make what I want, like in a Word document, and upload into Conveyo. So I know
And you should be able to add like a little note box on top of the document wherever you want.
You could edit it, you could make notes to yourself, comments to yourself in those too, because we're gonna be responsible when we're finished this process, of going back through what we've done and putting those one by one into Conveyo. And what we put in will presumably be modified in part by our next work session too, when we hear other people's comments and ideas as well.
Well, and that gets me to, so things need to be logged into Conveyo. We're looking for substantive comments to be identified by July 7th. So an example of that, we already have one flagged, is how open space versus lot coverage interact within the existing regulations. That is one of the great points of confusion right now. Open space at subdivision, lot coverage at development, but open area at develop. I mean, it's just all over the place. With cluster development, it's excluded from lot coverage, it's excluded from open space, and yet buried in this whole other section, it says must establish 40% open space. And it's like, what? So we're at a staff level still unwinding that, trying to figure out historically what this ideally, or where it ideally started, where it potentially took some twists and turns with other revisions to the ordinance over time. And we know we're going to need to talk to you more substantively about what does that really need to look like in terms of how that should be applied going forward. So that's an example of something substantive. So hopefully that helps, because we've already gone through, the vast majority of this in painstaking detail. I know some of you guys are new to the commission, so you weren't there for some of it. But we've gone through every single one of these chapters already. There are some modifications, additions, things that have been massaged as we worked at it at a staff level and realized, oh, this doesn't work so good, and it has an ancillary impact. So some of that has happened that you will see when you're looking at this. And I'll reiterate that point again at the end. So that's an example of a substantive comment, not, oh, this is missing a comma or that kind of thing. We can take care of that through Conveyo. It's really things that warrant discussion for finessing for that July 10th work session. So, next slide.
So,
Well,
yeah,
so-
Oh, sorry. Yep.
go ahead.
Who?
Under post-legal review steps,
Uh-huh,
it says possible joint PCCC work session.
uh-huh.
What does that mean when it's possible?
It means I don't have management on board and a date set.
We recommend to you that we think it's very important that we have a work session with the city council.
I recognize that. So I know you guys have emphasized that before. I gotta sell it up the food chain here. So,
You're put in the middle by the planning commission wanting to do this.
so I will emphasize that.
A work session with the city council would require some substantive work beyond what we're talking about here. It involves analysis, it involves, that would be a place where one would have to have, I think, a listing of all the changes that are recommended in the new ordinance from the old ordinance. There's some that are big and some that are little, but there's no point in meeting with the city council unless we can say, these are the 20 things that changed. And it may be some of them are trivial and you can ignore, but there's those things that are substantive, certainly have to be identified. So that'll take some real preparation to be doing it. And it's of a different character than our review and edits that we put in.
Okay, and I said, I've not gotten there. I've not given it that degree of thought in terms of what that really needs to look like. And how much of that really is just prepping them for what does this look like, kind of like we're doing tonight with you all. So I haven't dove into that far yet, which is not great, but it's just where we are.
It's so important to have a work session with the city council because they should have an opportunity to tell us what we were thinking or expecting. We want to hear those comments from them and we can try to address that.
Yeah, and there's a real strong, almost certainty that they'll pick up on something, and then we will have discussed that and deliberated quite
Exactly.
amount of detail, and we can share with them why we ended up here.
And let me
Rather
refresh
than- yeah.
something else here. Every single one of your work sessions, they have been invited to. Every single one. You just didn't see the emails that went out to all of the council membership, all of the Board of Adjustment membership, that you're welcome to join this work group. So Catherine Nakai has been the one who has been consistently here. They have all had opportunity for that. And I recognize we've had some changes on that council over time, but that's
Well,
kind of where we
Ju-
are.
Just an example, I mean, it was kind of amusing in a way, but when the city council was doing their final deliberations on the medical healing ordinance, and one of the council members said, well, why didn't we include the central business district? And because we discussed that quite a bit, and we were under the impression that the council didn't want it included, and yet they're asking the question is like, if there had been that kind of communication, we could have very easily flattened that, and they could have benefited from the debate we had. And we could also learn from, okay, was that soft recommendation or were they hard over on that? So I think all that interplay is exceedingly valuable.
And if we have the work session, they may have their questions and issues addressed, not comfortable. Once it gets to their turn to do a public hearing, they'll feel much more comfortable.
And I know some of them have been up, because all these sessions are recorded. They're available on the city website. I know some of them have gone back and watched some of these over time, different points in time. So I said, my point is there's been plenty of opportunity to be very much involved in how we got to where we are.
But
Please don't make it seem like the city council members should be obligated to sit in on all of our work sessions. It's
All I'm
our
saying is they
job.
had
Our job is
opportunity.
to communicate with them what the result of that was,
yeah,
and not to expect them to have to, I mean, they're busy enough with everything else.
So, okay, ready to move on?
just, you'll probably have this, but I assume in Conveo, then, I don't know if you'll create a new space and convey or whatever, but you'll like consolidate the subparts and make it just a clean chapter 1 through N.
Jen is nodding yes. So yes,
Yeah.
you will have a new set to look at.
Yeah,
That's good.
okay,
Yeah,
Thank you.
because you asked for a clean copy. So you're getting a clean copy.
perfect.
So this is where you start.
Okay,
Yeah, emphasis, this is where you start. I know Valerie is amazing at trying to connect this to this, this to this, this to this. Please don't do that. Do not do that. You will make your head explode. We don't want that. That will make paperwork. So yeah, just treat it what you see. Where are you? You know, because that gets into the next slide, actually. Things we did not touch. You guys were very clear, don't touch sign regulations. Things are maybe in a different place where all the sign definitions are now in definitions, you know, but it's all there. We've changed a word in terms of, you know, things that need to comply with this chapter. It's now like this UDC, this Unified Development Code. So that type of editorial change you might have seen, but otherwise we did not change sign types. We did not change any of the metrics. Another one was any of the stuff related to marijuana. That's exactly as it was. It's just in different locations in the document. Adult businesses, same thing. We did not touch those. One of our sacred things is short-term rentals. Did not touch. And then the most recent one was natural medicine businesses. All of that is as it was adopted. Like I said, just in different locations based on this new structure. Another addition, and we mentioned this at our last meeting because we had the public hearing related to the core tower, is wireless communication facilities. Last July, City Council adopted a new ordinance related to those, and it's located in Title V of the City Code. And so the city attorney asked us to now integrate that into the zoning end of things. So you'll see that showing up in definitions, in specific use standards, and then also because of how that ordinance is written, it's its own standalone permit at the end of Chapter 6. But it's all consistent with what's in that ordinance that was adopted last year. It's very much restructured though. And then as we talked many times over the course of this project, keeping all of our current metrics the same. So if the setback is 25 feet, now it's 25 feet going forward. Building height, landscaping requirements, all those kind of things where we weren't wanting to modify those standards in terms of how this affects what it looks like in our community. That's all there. It just looks different. And Jen will touch on this. A great example is in Chapter 2, where we have all the zoning districts that list these metrics. It's now in a table form as opposed to a bunch of text. But the metrics are still there. So those were the things, the types of things that we really didn't touch. Yes, Lou. Microphone. Lou, please.
I hear what you're saying. Why on the slide, and I'm just thinking, because you're probably gonna have similar slides that go to council. Why did you say attempted? That makes it sound like
Because
we
there's,
changed it.
I'm guaranteed we did change something, but everybody smiled and nodded and I can't tell you what it was.
Okay,
That's wiggle room. I'm covering my butt for when somebody comes and says, hey, what about this one?
yeah, like, for example, we did modify the timing for public notice because
That's a
we
great
determined
example.
Yeah.
it really, it was overly constrictive and we could achieve the same result and get more
Yes.
time for the public without increasing the overall timeline.
yeah.
So we kept the
I appreciate that you guys
intent.
did that.
And with less complexity. That was the other thing,
Yeah.
because it was all over the place in
Yeah.
terms of timelines. So, and Lou, you had very specific recommendations around that, I remember. It may not be what you asked for, but it's the consensus of when this group looked at this in terms of what they wanted to bring forward. So,
Also included under items not updated, we purposely decided not to incorporate the flood damage
Yep.
prevention regulations of the city, because those are so tied to federal requirements and FEMA and so on and so forth.
That
And
still lives in chapter 20 or
Yep.
title 20
Yep.
of the municipal code.
And the other big land use section in our code that we didn't touch was Title 19, the vested property rights
Correct.
section, which is probably, I don't know if it's ever been used.
I don't know.
It came into place when I was sitting in your chair, Karen, and it came down from the state that there's a procedure for a developer to vest their property rights. And that wasn't touched either.
So. Okay, so things we did update. The uses in our use table were consolidated. Terminology was updated. So that will look different. The goal was to streamline it and make sure it connected with specific use standards. So in that use table, there's a column that connects that. Jen will probably talk about that again. This was a whole separate substantive work session we had around what we call our residential types. Some of that was the state's change in law that doesn't allow us to regulate occupancy by family. It is now household. There's a definition of household. And then, so rather than have like multifamily dwelling, it's a multi-household dwelling. Or so we those changes were modified. Definitions were updated around that. And then we added definitions, especially related to like park model RV units and tiny homes, well, one of our favorites. But like I said, that was a specific work session, so you see that all integrated. The parking table was updated to align with those use categories in the use table. So hopefully there's more direct interconnect when you're looking for large format retail. What's the parking status, the requirement that goes with that? So this is an example of metrics that did change. There's some things we had in Woodland Park here where the parking space count was very high compared to what's considered more of a standard now. So some of those were modified closer to an industry standard. So hopefully that will save on those future conversations of you're making me put how many parking spaces in there. This will never use that much. And Jen may be able to go into a little more detail in terms of what was up, what was down, but it is much more consistent with the transportation engineering side of things. There was another work session where we talked about clarifying our subdivision processes because we had a variety of plats that got handled different ways. And so our categorization and how those things get handled is more streamlined. The PUD process was another one that we really took a look at through a specific work session, because you'll recall that it talks about preliminary plans and final plans and modifying plans, and you can't tell what goes with the actual zone change. What's a controlling document? You know, it's very confusing at the moment. And you guys have already looked at that section. We've clarified that process so that there is now that concept plan and then a general development plan. So that hopefully is much more clear when you look through there. The biggest change was chapter 6, our administration chapter. You all have heard me say this before, that CJ was the one who got the task to go through our current code and identify all the instances of where process is located. And you know, it was what, 26 in Title 17 and 23 in Title 18. It was kind of crazy. It was like 50 some odd different locations for trying to sort out process. So hopefully we have achieved it's all in chapter 6.
Yay.
So that's the big win. If nothing else happens with this code, that's potentially the really big win. And then the other thing we did is you all have fresh memories on this because we've had some recent ordinances like natural medicine businesses and then our water requirement ordinance that came through just this year. Those have been integrated into this document. So that's kind of the very broad overview and introduction. So what Jen and I were thinking is she's got a series of slides, and I think we decided we're gonna like let her present the slide and then kind of break and discuss about that segment. So she's gonna do a more detailed overview of the document and its chapters, and then we'll go into each of those chapters in a little more depth. So that's, I think, where we are.
So just real quick question. I think I know the answer, but just to verify. So as of this moment, this will be fully codified. It'll capture all the up-to-date ordinances and prior code, correct? As of this moment.
That's the objective, yeah. If
Okay.
somebody says tomorrow, hey, Karen, we're gonna do this new ordinance for something,
Yeah,
it's a horse race to see if this or that gets adopted first. More likely that, but you
and
know.
once this gets into formal review, we probably snap a chalk line, and if there's an ordinance in consideration, it'll be like that'll get added after this is approved, I'm guessing.
Or if that happens first, we'll integrate it like we've done the other ones. So, yeah, it'll come together. That's the goal.
All right, thanks.
Yep.
Irene, could you back up one slide? Slide
Absolutely.
four.
To this one?
Yes, I want to point out to my fellow commissioners, bullet number 3, parking table update. There's kind of a minor revolution going on in the planning thought and theory practitioners around the country. And they're thinking that maybe it's time that we remove parking requirements from any uses. That sounds pretty radical. If you're a generalist and you're grown up with these type of things being in place, their theory is that let the marketplace decide how much parking each specific use ought to be. And it's their fault if they don't provide enough for their customers. And naturally, where we came from provisions before is we didn't want to see that be a problem. We wanted to take care of it early. But I just wanted to let you know that that may be something we look at in the future.
Perhaps, but I don't know that that type of solution is good for every community. Because, you know, when I talk to my team all the time, what we're looking at is what are the uses, what are the impacts of that use, and what process do they need to follow? And so when somebody's potentially proposing no parking, and yet they're an automotive driven business that has people, their customers coming there by car, what is the impact? Well, what does this happen to the neighbor's parking lot? So how do you potentially mitigate impacts to that neighboring business's parking lot? Because, you know, it's not uncommon to have businesses war over a shared parking lot or one that's mine, but the other business customers thinks they can park there. And yeah, so those type of civil disputes are never fun, but I appreciate the update or the thought in terms of where some of the world is potentially trending. I just think it's going to be a while before Woodland Park's ready to go there.
Yeah, I'm simply not, I'm not advocating that we relook at that right now. Not at all.
Thank you.
Just wanted to mention.
So, anything else before Jen moves on?
Go back again.
Awesome. All right, Jen, you're up.
All right. So we wanted to highlight some overall structural updates. And I know Karen just went through a few of what changed and what didn't change. Just to remind us all kind of where we're going from and coming to, you know, we've combined, I believe, 3 or 4 titles into one. So this new document will be identified as the Unified Development Code, and you'll see referenced throughout the document. We'll just have the term UDC. So just keep that in mind as you're looking through it. Karen and I have really tried very hard to update anywhere in the code that says, you know, refers to this title, which would have referred to Title 17 or 18. A few references said this code, but we want to be very clear that we're talking about this UDC. So keep that in mind as you're reviewing. As you're all aware, I think through the process that we've gone through, we do have 7 chapters. So again, when we send out those PDFs, you will send 7 separate PDFs so you can kind of see them side by side. Sometimes there's it's been very helpful for Karen and I, even as we're going through this, to remind ourselves, okay, I'm looking for something, it's in this document, I can have them up side by side to kind of look through. Those chapters are, chapter 1 is our general provisions. Chapter 2 is zone districts. Chapter 3 is development standards. Chapter 4 is your use districts or use standards, sorry. Chapter 5 is subdivision standards. Chapter 6 is administration, and then chapter 7 to round it out is all the definitions. We have updated the structure. So like Karen said, when you see these documents, some of them are going to look fairly different from the draft that you reviewed, that we've all reviewed together. We've worked very hard to incorporate a little table of contents at the beginning of each chapter that's specific to that chapter. We have a purpose statement at the beginning of every chapter, and we have applicability statements at the beginning of everything except for chapters 1 and 7, because 1 is your general provision. So you go into your title and effective date and all of that, and applicability is a portion of that. Your definitions really don't have, it's applicable to the whole code, but all your chapters 2 through 6 do have an applicability statement at the beginning. And then you go into the structure of the individual structure of each chapter. As we've stated already a couple times, this will be a clean document, no red lines, a clean copy for you to review. There will be, I don't even know, we're gonna have to count them up at some point, hundreds of cross-references in each document that reference you to other chapters, reference you to other sections in a chapter. That's one of the things that's taking us quite a bit of time here at the end as we've moved things around, trying to update those references. We're highlighting a number of those because they're ones that could change based on our conversations with you. So just as you see things highlighted throughout, those are just for a kind of a flag for us to remember to go back in and make sure that those references are fully updated as we finalize the draft. So any questions on the structural update? It'll be really clear when you see it, but I think you're gonna hope you're gonna like it because it's much more standardized throughout each document.
Yeah, I've got kind of a 2-part but interrelated question. So previously, like in the title, we'd have a lot of references to the ordinance that was passed, which, you know, brought this chunk O code, you know, into the title. Since this is going through the full review and approval process, technically we don't need those anymore because this is all going to be approved en masse. So although I like those historical references, they could all be dropped. Now, second part of my question, going forward as an ordinance is passed and then incorporated into the UDC, if we quote that ordinance word for word and cite that ordinance, then it should not require any additional reapproval. So I was kind of curious how we were going to handle references to ordinances prior to this UDC update. I'm okay either way, either take them all out or keep them. But then also curious in the future when new ordinances are passed and need to get folded into the UDC, how we're going to maintain that integrity of that it's been truly reviewed, blessed, approved.
A lot of that is a function of the city clerk's office. And in this case, the ordinance would be a repeal chapter or titles 16, 17, and 18 and replace with this. So this kind of draws a new line in the sand. And like I said, this is where you get into clerk stuff. And I don't know if it's at the end where there's like, or at the beginning, there's a general, you know, editorial reference that you're kind of talking about, you know, that maybe references all those old ordinances. I'm not sure exactly what that looks like. But in the future, once this one's adopted, let's say somebody comes in with flying cars and we need to modify our ordinance to accommodate those. That whatever sections get added, deleted, you know, within that, that's when you'll see that citation show up again in terms of what ordinance made that change to this larger one. But like I said, that's all really managed by the clerk's office.
Mhm.
So,
So is the intent that for this update, that the past ordinance references would be stripped out?
as far as I know, it's a repeal of all the prior ones and a
Sure,
replace.
sure. I mean, it's,
And you've got some of that already that happened. There were some big update,
Mhm.
because you'll still see in there, it'll reference a code from like 64 or 67. So, like I said, you're talking about clerk stuff. That's really a conversation to have with the city clerk. I'm not as familiar with the mechanics and what that looks like. I recognize that that's not something we have to do as part of drafting this document, though.
I'm glad that you addressed bullet number 4. There's such a temptation to review a clean copy and look for these citations and then follow that citation back to where it is in the code, but that's going to be a moving target until almost the very end. And we just must trust staff that they're going to do the right thing. They're going to make sure that all those pieces are connected correctly. So
And in this type of wholesale rewrite, it's incredibly challenging to do that and to work from as much of our existing language as we did. In some ways, it would have been much easier to just draft a new code, but I don't think that would have gone over real well in this community. This is the product I was charged with delivering, so we're coming to the end and delivering it. I said Valerie especially liked to connect those dots. And a lot of where I spent time was kind of, okay, I've got the wireless communication facility ordinance is a great example. I've got this. Now I've got to dissect this and get it plugged into the different sections of this document. So I literally went beyond electronics and whiteboards that I had paper that I had cut it apart and pasted it to the whiteboard as I was trying to make sure that things where they were written, it's like, why is this here? This is an approval criteria. Why is this here? This is a submittal requirement, you know, just in terms of how the original adopting ordinance was constructed versus the format that we are now, with your guidance, recommending and bringing forward. So it's what it is.
Mhm.
Okay, Jen.
All right. Okay, now I'm going to go chapter by chapter, and this doesn't capture every little edit, but we just wanted to highlight the kind of overall edits in each of these chapters. Some of this Karen's already talked about a little bit, and we can go into a little bit more detail. But just kind of wanted to walk through each chapter. So this is where you're taking that little package at Christmas, and we're shaking it a little bit. We're going, okay, I think I know what might be in here. But chapter 1 again, general provisions. We combined the title and effective date right up front. So after your table of contents, the first thing you see is this title is Unified Development Code, and it is effective as of X date. We felt that was very important to have right up front in the first part of the document. The purpose statement, we didn't do a whole lot of changes to. We've worked on some changes with this group over time, just to update that. We took one more pass through it just to make sure there wasn't any repetition. There was a couple of bullet points that were easier read, kind of all combined together. So just some minor edits to the purpose statement to update that. We did add a short section on the overall code structure. So it says right up front after the purpose statement, this whole Unified Development Code consists of 7 chapters that all work together. So trying to highlight that right off the bat as well. We've incorporated the nonconformity provisions and violations and penalty sections, which as Karen and I were going through all these drafts, they were kind of floating off in a couple of different areas, and we pulled them right up front into the general provisions. So, and we've updated the non-conforming provisions. We didn't update a whole lot. The basic content and intent of that remains the same. We've updated some of the wording just to be a little bit more clear. And violations and penalties were scattered throughout. So we've just brought that all together and tried to provide a little clarity. The violations or penalties in the sign code chapter have been brought over to this section as well to just keep that all in one place. So any basic questions on this one?
I was just going to add that a lot of the rationale for having these in chapter 1 is since this is part of what really applies to the Unified Development Code as a whole, as opposed to having it nestled in a sub or another one of the chapters. So that was really chapter 1 is that framework for going forward with the rest of these chapters.
What is this chapter title?
General provisions, I believe.
General provision.
Okay.
Probably the shortest chapter. It won't take you very long to get through. Chapter 2, again, and I should have put the titles on the slides, but chapter 2 is our zone districts. As you guys might remember, it's been a long time since we looked at this chapter. I think it was one of the first ones we looked at. We grouped all the different, all the residential zone districts are in a section together, all the commercial districts in a section, your overlays in a section. So we've grouped all of those together so that we could have information that's specific to just residential districts at the front end, kind of some general provisions, same with commercial and so on. And then each zone district really keeps to pretty much one page, and it has your zone district description, so kind of the intent of that district, and then a table with all of your dimensional standards, so the setbacks, building heights, so on. That's pretty much all that's in each of those zone districts, was just kind of that description, and then the dimensional standards, and it's very consistent throughout the entire chapter. So pretty simple. I know we had, I don't know, for those of you that remember going back, there was a lot of information that was very repetitive in this original chapter, and we've just really consolidated a lot of that up front so that we could keep it very succinct through each zone district. Any questions on that?
I got nothing, Jen.
All right. Chapter 3, again, is our development standards. So development standards, Karen and I were just talking about this earlier. You've got kind of three chapters that deal with standards. You've got your development standards, your use standards, and your subdivision standards. Development standards are kind of items, if you think about them, that apply to the ground, to the site, very specifically to the site. So as you're developing a site, it's your parking, your lighting, your landscaping, all of those kind of elements that are going to come in with a site plan. So they apply holistically to the development. Typically after it's been subdivided, you have your lot and you're ready to really look at all those specific details. So yeah, parking, landscaping, lighting, signs, it's all of those type of standards. And as Karen mentioned earlier, I did just pull up the parking ratios. I think it would be really interesting we've prepared a table of the existing ratios against the new. Most of them remain the same or very similar, but what we've done is with some of the combinations of uses, you have situations where, for example, one of them, I believe it was trailer parking. It was the way that we combine the uses. One of the uses was one space per 600 square feet, and the other use was one space per 200 square feet. So we had to kind of find the middle ground there. A couple of uses, your government administration uses, the original was 1 per 200 square feet, and we've increased that to 1 per 400 square feet, or decreased actually. So that's just a couple of examples. The industrial uses are another one. A lot of your industrial uses require quite a bit of parking. And if you think about that, you're typically only having a few employees. It's not really a retail or public facing use where you need a ton of parking. So we've adjusted those according to industry standards as well. So I'm happy to kind of put together a highlight of some of those if we need that for an executive summary for moving forward. Any questions about that?
Nobody's shaking their head. I think you're
Okay,
good.
I will highlight, because we cannot lose track of this, that my favorite change in this whole code was removing the word shrubbery from your landscape section. So for those of you who have not been around for the whole project, you'll know that's one of my favorites. So
It's also sparked an idea for a future conference session.
yes,
What was that, Jen? You were talking about doing a session on what? Antiquated
Yeah.
term, land use
yes,
code?
all the antiquated or really odd terms that we find in codes that we end up value engineering out or updating. So, and believe me, there's been a lot. We have some codes in Utah that we're working on, and they used to do pigeon racing, and so that was a use in their code. All right.
Okay.
Chapter 4. This is your use standards. So again, this is all of the specific standards that apply to each of those uses, and not every use has a standard associated with it. When it's a very straightforward use that's just, you know, allowed on a property, doesn't need any particular standards, there wouldn't be anything listed. Probably the biggest change in this chapter is the use table. You guys will hopefully remember us going through the use table, trying to combine similar uses, change up some of the titles. So we've consolidated and renamed. We've reorganized the whole use table. This is one of those moving targets that everyone has a different way of looking at a use table. Some people just want it alphabetized top to bottom. Some people want it categorized by residential versus commercial versus industrial. So we've had probably 3 different versions of this use table with different people's opinions on how it should be organized. We'll bring forward to you kind of our final crack at this, and probably reorganize it at least one more time before we get to the end. But the other highlight on this one that Karen and I have added that I think is a really useful tool is a column for the use standards. So you'll have your, my background moves my hands out of the way, so you can't see my hands talking, but so you have a column for each of the uses, and then a column for a reference to the section that has that use standard, and then you have each of your zone districts and what allowance is in there. So it hopefully really makes it a lot more user friendly. And then I just wanted to highlight the tie between this and your development standards. Many of your uses also need to meet those development standards. So natural medicine businesses are a great example. There's a specific standard in your natural medicine business standard for lighting, kind of a real nuanced little standard for lighting, but you also need to meet the site lighting standards as well. So any questions about the use chapter?
I don't remember, do we have a precedences clause somewhere?
What?
Precedences? So, this table will be so, so awesome. It's like, I want to do X. I find that line, I look across, not only tells me where I can do it, but it also highlights, oh, I gotta also conform with lighting, sidewalks, etc. Great. But what if, God forbid, something in that table conflicts with the text in one of the other, in this or another chapter? So usually in a contract, you state what has precedence. In case something conflicts, what is the
I
what
believe that
seats
language
charge?
is in chapter 1, and it's typically the more restrictive applies. So, I mean, if you find an example, we'll work through it, Don, but that's
Okay.
that's
I mean,
typically,
that takes judgment, what's considered more or less restrictive, but
I can't remember the language in terms of how it's worded, and I think it's finessed. It's more elaborate explanation than that, but
this
it's,
table is probably the most likely example where something like that might occur, and we could just say either this table takes precedence or this table is for information, but the specific, section of code takes precedence.
With the use table, it lists specific uses. There's quite often definitions that go with the uses. If there isn't, it's because it's a very kind of common term that should be pretty straightforward. Right after the table, there is a section for uses not listed. That's more likely what we encounter when it's a use that we're not able to otherwise plug in within a category. So what do you do with that? So there's a provision there that sets up how you go about adding a use to the table. And that language is very similar to what's currently in our regulations. This is one of the things that did get modified and updated, because right now it's a specific process and it's essentially a code change is what it is. It's not great the way it's written. So what it says now is, the planning director, makes the determination as to whether or not this is in the table. If the applicant wants to go forward with having this added, then you go and you follow the code change process to get it done, is what it says now. That's essentially how it functioned, or what we're proposing.
Yeah, I was
What it says now
this
is
is usually
essentially
more
that, but
involved with if there's a real or perceived conflict between different parts of the code. Let's say, in that table, it says lighting standards apply, and then I go to that section and it says nothing about lighting standards, and then I'm like, now what? Now what do I do? Which can I ignore it, or do I have to abide by it?
a lot of that goes down to the planning team and the director making those determinations. If somebody really doesn't like the determination that the director makes, there's the appeals process to the Board of Adjustment. That's how it works.
Okay.
I think what Don is saying, there ought to be a provision in the code to talk about that situation.
And again, I think it's in chapter 1.
Okay, okay.
That talks about what prevails if there is a conflict.
we'll look
So-
for it.
Okay, yeah, all right. Thanks.
The other thing in the use table I wanted to mention, to refresh memories, is you all recall, I'm sure, that there was this lovely, things were listed as P for permitted, C for conditional use. Then there was our favorite PC, which was never defined anywhere. At your direction, we eliminated all the PCs. So it depending upon what it was and the impacts, if it was something pretty simple and straightforward, it went to a permitted use. If it was something that we know has concerns, or we've seen concerns expressed, or other places it's a conditional use, we most likely went to a conditional use. So you see some of that. The other thing, in our regulations, we have a special use permit process. And there were uses listed in this table that were never flagged as, it should be a special use. So I believe the wireless, no, that's not a good one. Cemeteries, I think, and helipads were listed under the special use permit section as, these are subject to special use. But when you look in the use table, it didn't have an S next to it. And then we also show the things that special events and outdoor vendors, those are temporary uses. So those are listed with Ts for that temporary use permit. So that should hopefully provide additional clarity that's not there now.
Karen was referencing the PC. Some of you will know, or some of you do not know, but PC stood for planned conditional. And what that meant was that there were conditions and standards in place to address that specific use and in other places in the code. So
Yeah,
this
and-
format that we're talking about takes care of all that.
Yeah, with the addition of the actual reference to the use specific standard fills that also.
Yep.
So I said that is a change that happened, but we like to think that what we're presenting you is far more functional and logical than what we've currently got in place.
Agreed.
So.
Do we want to say something in this chapter that there was an intent to try and maintain the uses the way they were? We weren't changing a lot of zones, that's adding yeah, we tried to maintain the original integrity of the table in some regard.
Generally.
I mean, we didn't really try and change it, did we?
No, it was just part of the update in terminology and.
Yeah, we didn't like say,
functionality,
oh,
so-
let's start permitting these things in these zones that we didn't before.
Yeah, I don't think
I
there
would
needs to be a
let's
provision.
Eliminate those.
I would
don't-
actually caution against that because if you state that as your intent and then you don't strictly follow your intent, then that gives someone an avenue to say that that's not valid. So I would say it's great for the dialogue. Can put it in the ordinance, you know, in the whereases or whatever. But I would recommend not putting it in the code because it could lead someone to think.
No, I meant the presentation where we said, tried not to change
Oh.
metrics, tried not to change this. I think a bullet says, we tried not to change the uses or the zones or the intent of the table.
Yeah,
So we
within,
tried to maintain the original integrity of the table.
within a presentation, yes,
Yeah.
yes, we probably should add that in within the presentation. So hence my pile on at the end here, so.
Well, we said it about some other things and the table's the biggest, one of the biggest, you know, things for controlling the environment of our different zones and so forth.
Yeah, I agree. That's a really great note that I just took down in my notes to add to for future presentations and summaries of what we've done. All right. Anything else on chapter 4?
Nope,
right,
doesn't look
yeah.
like it.
Perfect. Chapter 5, this is our subdivision standards. And again, this applies holistically to the subdivision of land. So it's standards like, you know, street types, street widths, lot frontages, easement dedications, that need to come in with that subdivision process. And this is well before you get to your development standards and uses. So this is just, you know, all the pieces that would need to be required at that subdividing stage. It also includes what improvements are required by the developer and the subdivision improvement agreement that would come along with that. So if there's public improvements required, then there's an agreement between the developer and the town or the city on, you know, when those improvements need to be made, and then posting of guarantees. So there's language on all of that in this subdivision chapter. Additionally, and a lot of that really remains fairly similar to what you have in your current code. We just reorganized most of that. The part that did change probably the most in this chapter is the parkland dedication. And I don't know if you guys remember when we first went through this, it was like, who's the what and who's on first and where's on second. And it took us a bit of unraveling, working with the Parks and Rec Advisory Board about how it's really being implemented. Going back to the city's adopted fee schedule, because there's fees listed in the code that are different than what's on the fee schedule. So we've cleaned this up quite a bit, hopefully clarified the language, but that's probably the biggest section that really changed in chapter 5 to look at.
Yeah, because there were what fees at the time of, or fees in lieu of parkland dedication. There's just park fees in general that happen. Then there's another fee that happens at the time somebody pulls the building permit for a house. There's open space dedications. So that's another one that needs to be unraveled a little bit. Or open space on lot relative to lot coverage. But it's highly complex. To Jen's point, we did go back through old ordinances, what happened when, what was this supposed to be? Because there were changes that happened over time. And when somebody doesn't understand or pay attention to where you started, it loses and gets very confusing. So and I can see Larry's going to want to do this. Feel free to read our current section on all this and then read what we have in this document here. This is one of the few times I'll say go for it because Jen's point when we were talking earlier today, she says, I can understand this now. You know, what you've got in the current regs that we point to, it's like, what is going on. So and so the metric, what gets dedicated, how much, that's all still there. It's just better explained. And then there was even criteria in terms of what's of value to be open space or parkland. That got pulled out and it's much easier to find. So that's the other thing, is right now it's part of that scavenger hunt of just what?
As far as the, final presentation with city council or to the public, I could see actually pulling an example like that.
Mhm.
This was the quagmire that one had to try to navigate, and here's how what we believe is restating the same thing, but in a very straightforward, logical fashion.
And it was like 4 or 5 ordinances that I was
Sure.
unraveling over time, to get it cleaned up and deconstructed, reconstructed, you know?
Yeah.
So,
For when we go to council, do you have documented formally or informally of what that roadmap is for each of those pieces, so that if a council person says, I don't understand how this got to be that, we've got enough backup material that somebody I don't want it included in this,
yeah,
but can talk to it and lead somebody down.
I can't
You
do it.
give an example, like Don suggested.
I can't do it step by step, but I can say in this code now, it references these ordinances related to these sections. We went back to those and literally chronologically went through and looked at where do we start, what changed and when. And from that was able to reformat this. So the integrity and the desired end result of every single one of those is now represented and clearly articulated. That's the explanation I can give.
Okay. Just a comment that, because that's one of those things that you want to have the information available to you so that you can explain it. But with all due respect, most of the council won't have even read the stuff beforehand, much less had the question. It's just me. So you wouldn't want to put it in the text of the new thing, but you'd want to just have notes for yourself in
Yeah, that's
case
your
they ask the
backup material
question.
to talk to.
Yeah.
In case they ask you a question.
Yeah.
That's,
Yeah, point taken. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that feedback.
Not only that, the point in time of when something was approved and what were the ordinances that were in effect at that particular time has been carried over. In my particular neighborhood where I live, there's a pretty large development around that area. And the developer has been very keen for many, many years to say, I was subject to this provision at this particular moment in time, and I'm still following it. So just gotta be aware. No names mentioned.
Yeah, thinking again of what, like, we've gone through with the council, somebody's gonna raise that kind of question. And if you can just have enough information to lead them through it on how complex it was, that establishes a credibility that hopefully will eliminate other similar questions like that. Otherwise, you'll be there for weeks. Once you establish your credibility, then they believe you.
yeah, you don't want to not have information that you can readily say, and then have them think you don't know anything you're doing. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
It's a psychological thing as much as anything else.
Okay.
Worst thing you can do too is bullshit. I mean,
Yeah.
just make something up on the fly just to answer that particular question at that particular moment. The best thing to say, that's a good point. I need to do more research on that. Let me get back to you.
Okay.
All right. Chapter 6, this is probably the one that's the most fresh in everybody's minds. This is that administration chapter that we spent several meetings going through all the different pieces. I was just looking at this one again last night and it reads so much better. I think you guys are going to really like the structure of it. And I know we had some good consensus on the pieces of it anyway. Again, like I said, this is probably the biggest change in the code because we took all those 26 or however many references throughout all the different titles of application procedures and have combined them all in one place. A lot of this will look fairly similar to what you guys have reviewed. We've made a few organizational updates to it. The decision makers are all fairly similar to what you last saw. We've added, I believe the city manager has a couple of authoritative sections, so we've added that in there. The common review procedures, which includes your noticing requirements, has all your, all the different steps of the common procedures. That procedures table is now finalized and fleshed out on, each application type, who's the review authority, who's the decision making authority, who's the appeal authority, which of those applications needs to go to a pre-application. And we've inserted a column similar to the use table that references you down to which section has all of the procedural standards in it. So in the document you receive, you'll just have that reference. When this gets codified in MuniCode, that'll actually be a clickable reference that will take you down to the appropriate section. We've divided up the specific application procedures, all the procedures that we look through for preliminary plat, final plat, conditional use permits, all of those. We've combined them into two groups. So you'll have one section that's specific procedures for applications requiring public hearings, all of your plats and things. And then there's a separate section for procedures for permits and applications requiring administrative review. That one's a little bit smaller. The public hearing one is a little bit longer. So again, a lot of this I think will look fairly familiar to you. The organization, the structure, the numbering is fairly similar. Some of the numbering has changed, and then the organization of the specific procedures, as you guys remember before, it was like 6.06 number or XX, and those actually have numbers now and they're fully organized. So any questions about this chapter?
Are you retaining the information? Let's just pick one. Who's the decision authority in each place, and then the tables for reference, or would you just send them to the table so it's only one place?
The section about each of the boards really just describes powers. And then the table is, you're really looking, okay, I need to do a conditional use permit. I need a pre-application conference. It's a public hearing with
Right.
planning commission, city council's decision maker.
Yeah,
So
good
that's what that
example.
table is.
So when I go to the section on conditional use permit, would it restate that information you
No.
just gave, or would it just say, go to the table and follow the process?
It does not restate it, so that will send you, okay, to follow conditional use permit, see this section.
Good.
And that's where it takes you, and you've got the list of the purpose of the conditional use permit, the submittal requirements, the review criteria, that's where that's listed. So the example that.
So as much as possible, it's not repetitive.
Right, really tried to not be repetitive. And when Jen and I were talking even earlier today or yesterday, I joked and described that these 7 chapters, they really are designed to be very integrated and work together. So it's like a group of 7 people all holding hands, walking down the street together, having a conversation. And then the next joke goes, well, that explains why local government can be cumbersome. But that's really how this stuff is supposed to work together. And so and that's where you guys are the great test in terms of, does this connect the dots for me, or did I get lost somewhere? So some of that may be just learning to use the document. Some of it maybe we dropped the ball and we need to correct a reference that it's not accurate, or we should add one somewhere, depending. So it'll be interesting to see what your feedback is. But from a trained planner perspective, we and folks that are used to working with codes, we think it's functional.
Do we have, all the folks up here in your department have spent an awful lot of time going through this. We've had lots of work sessions doing it. We know a lot of the background and you're looking for certain things. Do we have anybody that we could give the code to that is really cold and can ask them to read it and say, does this make sense? Could you follow this through if you were trying to do something without the background that we all have?
The answer is maybe. Quite honestly, I have somebody in mind, but I haven't vetted it with the powers that be in terms of whether or not that I should do that. So, but I had that thought earlier.
But I think it really only makes sense in context of actually doing something. You know, building a home or erecting a business or something. So I would expect everyone who's done that or envisions doing that in the relatively near future is going to have part of the code that they really want to protect, part of the code that they really hate. And so I expect them to look for them to do the mental walk through this code. It's like, how would I follow? Does it make sense? Can I follow it? Does it keep what I like? Does it hopefully get rid of what I hate?
And I'm wondering if we should have a couple of folks like you were thinking of, maybe do that as a first level sanity check before we think about taking it to council.
And for what it's worth, I have done that along the way with especially problematic sections. A great example of this is the grading permit section. That was one of those where we had to deconstruct, reclassify, restructure it, and my team are the primary end users. I've got multiple holes in the walls where they've whacked their heads trying to sort that thing out. So I had them read through what you guys had looked at in terms of what does this look like going forward to make sure I hadn't missed anything. And they had a little bit of feedback, but overall we're very comfortable with where that is. And same kind of thing. It's like, I can follow this now. So I've done some of that beta testing, along the way.
Yeah, my concern would be with doing that, Lou, if you had like even a couple people, that's like, I would hate to feel like after 2.5 years, we're gonna start back at the beginning because you got some other person throwing in 2 cents that hasn't been in on any of the discussions at all over the 2.5 years. It's just I've been in organizations that's happened with, and you kind of end up having to go back 6 months.
Well, and that's
So-
where you got to be careful about what you're reading for. Is it reading for functionality and navigating, or am I like getting bogged down into this metric? I hate that it's this, that I'm sorry. I want to build houses with 9-foot ceilings. I want to build giant houses, multi-stories because of how I measure height. That height limitation in residential districts needs to be 40 feet. You got to get rid of that 30, that you end up potentially bogged down in something like that, which is not what we're asking for.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good idea. It just frightens me.
Yeah. So we'll, like I said, it's kind of rattling around. We'll see. And I may do that on the sly where you guys don't see that.
Good point.
How are we,
Don't let enough.
how are we accepting public comment on this?
After you guys do this review of the clean draft, and then it goes through legal review, then we go live with the general public in terms of what this is, where it is.
Will they
and-
like get their 3 minutes at the podium, or is it,
Well,
or
there's
are
the-
we gonna
the work
accept like
session, and
specific, I recommend changing text from A to B?
there's the works or the orientation, kind of like what we're doing. I don't know what we're calling it yet, open house, whatever, unveiling. And we will have them set up so they can log comments and Conveyo also.
okay.
So that's a tool that Jen's group has used with other communities. It's a great way to be able to track very specifically what's going on where. And then it's in the public hearing where you get folks at the podium
Sure.
actually specifically addressing planning commission and city council.
And we have to use our local media too. We have to use our local media,
Media, yes.
the
Yeah.
Courier, the Jackpot. Those people can get the word out to a lot of people and say, these people have been working on this for the last 2.5 years.
Yeah.
What do you think?
No, what you said about, I didn't know we were gonna open Conveo to the public, that's, I like the fact that if you're gonna give me a comment, take the time to specifically write down exactly what you recommend. So that, I think that helps us all, makes them focus on what they're really trying to say and makes it a lot clearer for us to, or the city council or whoever the power may be at that time to consider it and
Yeah.
adjudicate.
So. Anything else on chapter 6? Okay, Jen?
All right, moving on to chapter 7. Before I go into chapter 7, I'll say, in the vein of you guys talking about having other folks review and kind of test the new ordinance or new code. One of my colleagues has been helping out with some of these sections, and she's, been able to see the document start to finish. She has had the pleasure of comparing it to your existing code and has said many times, wow, this is so much clearer. So, I mean, that's coming from someone who writes code for a living, but she has said we collectively have all done a great job of clarifying a lot of very confusing provisions. So for what it's worth, there has been some other folks that have kind of peeked into this a little bit on our side. So chapter 7 again is definitions. This chapter, as you all know, we've combined all of we've made sure that all of the uses are defined. So that is one thing. We've removed all obsolete definitions. So there's been a couple of terms that have we've come across throughout this process and said, wait, where did that even come from? We've combed through all the drafts, all the drafts that we have, and there were a couple of terms that just are not used at all in this code. So we've removed those. As Karen mentioned earlier, the dwellings, you had single family home, now it's single household dwelling. A single household dwelling detached is just your standard home. Single household attached is your townhome style units. Removing that word family for state compliance. We've grouped definitions that are related to a specific use. So like short-term rentals, there's a whole bunch of definitions that are related to short-term rentals. The only place you find them is in those short-term rental standards. So rather than having them kind of scattered throughout the definitions and you're scratching your head going, what the heck is this for? It's grouped right under short-term rentals. Some of the ones that are the most perplexing are your sexually oriented business definitions, because you'll have like a nude something just randomly in your definitions, and it's very much related to this and not other types of uses. We have updated terminology and modernized several definitions. You guys will probably remember it's been a while since we've looked at the definitions, but some of them even had standards embedded in them. We've pulled those standards out and really cleaned that up. That is another thing that I completely forgot to mention in the uses. One of the things that for those of you that have been around for a while, will remember in the use chapter, we had that outdoor storage that was mentioned again and again and again. We've resolved that issue with a use outdoor storage. So all those references now point to the definition for outdoor storage and then the standards for outdoor storage. So we did clean that up as well. And I believe that is it on the chapters. Any questions on chapter 7?
Nobody's
right.
saying anything.
And I just keep thinking of things that we did to chapter 7, Karen. We also added some information at the beginning of this chapter, and this goes back to one of the comments earlier, that kind of defines how you use these terms. So my favorite legal term, and I will completely get it wrong if I try to state it right now without it open, but it's like the plural and the singular and the singular and the plural and the they and the he and she, and we've taken a lot of that out anyway, but it describes how those terms are to be used throughout the document. So kind of some standard language that's in a lot of codes. All right, Karen, tossing it back to you to wrap us up.
So when going forward, when doing your review, please remember this has been a lengthy process. So, memories fade. Jen and I have suffered from this as well, as we've gone through things. And then, yeah, they just might not be what you recall and where we landed or where we left off. A great example of that was the purpose statement. I gotta tell you, the night that we sorted that out, and it was, Councilmember Nakai sat here and said, well, we originally called it purpose statement, and then it went to purpose and intent statement, and then it did this, and then it did this, and now we're back to purpose. So I apologize in advance if something is not how you remember it. The question you need to ask yourself is, does this get the job done? Because at the end of the day, nobody's ever, like that, with that example, nobody's ever going to call it a purpose and intent statement. We will always shorten it. It will be just a purpose statement. So let's just start there. So, just that's my thought, so with that and doing these revisions, when Jen and I have worked on things, there's been times when we've identified something that's like, oh, this really doesn't work. It has to be modified. And then you realize, oh, there's a domino effect backwards. And so we've tried to clean that up. So it may not be what you recall, but again, does it get the job done? Does it intertwine correctly? Is this flowing? Are you able to understand what's going on? That's really the big end result here more than anything else. Because I have one dysfunctional code. Please, for the love of God, don't give me another one. That's my plea at the end of the day here. It's like what the better quality product that we can bring forward and just get it to work. That's a huge step forward for this community, in my opinion. So again, we're asking you to log substantive issues into Conveyo, or you can send them to me through an email. So that, hey, I think we really need to talk about X. We need that by July 7th. So Jen and I have a little bit of a window to prepare for that work session on July 10th related to those substantive issues. And then, like I said, I have promised you guys 3 full weeks. As far as I know, I'm going to be able to deliver more than that, because the goal is to get this out tomorrow. We have every intention of making that happen. So rather than from 3 weeks from tomorrow, we're giving you that extra weekend. So that gets you to Monday, the 21st at 8 a.m. to finish getting stuff logged into Conveyo.
You maybe use our extra weekend. The time is reduced less than half of that for substantive comments to come in, since it says they're supposed to be in by July 7th. So I will certainly endeavor to support you from my standpoint. But if I have substantive comments that come July 8th or July 21st, I'll make them.
We'll deal with that, absolutely, but the best so that we can meet this
But still,
timeline.
so
I just
more than
appreciate you
half of this
trying.
time will be the comments that sort of go into Conveyo, and I looked at somewhere and the commissions never discussed with one another. So if I have an important comment that I figure out in 11 days from now, it'll be too late.
Just do your
No
best.
one will hear about it. No one will hear my comments.
So
I have complete faith, Lee, that you'll make sure everybody knows,
yeah.
even if you had to do it personally.
Wait, so I kind of lost the bubble. So we're gonna have comments to you by July 7th, substantive comments. You're gonna,
Yeah, things like
Incorporate
the
those for
open
rev-
space section doesn't make sense. We've got to talk about this as a group.
okay, and then we'll talk about those things on the 10th.
Yep.
And then what is happening between the 10th and the whatever's 2 weeks?
Well, between the 10th and the 21st, my envision is that's when you can finish uploading your commas or corrections or capitalization, or this says code, it should be UDC. Those are the little things that we consider like editorial kind of things.
Okay, things that don't require us to debate.
We don't need to chat about them. We've already talked about every comma. Granted, we've rearranged some of them and added new ones.
So that'd be a great time probably to look through and make sure all the references are correct and things like that.
Yeah, so, and that's, again, something we don't need to talk about. It's really if there's meat behind it. And like I said, dissecting the open space versus lot coverage, that's a conversation that we need to
Okay.
clarify.
All right, thanks.
So,
I think we need to trust our staff to be able to look at our comments and say, this is a substantive copy and needs further discussion, or this is just a simple edit. So noted, and we don't need to talk about it. But I
So,
like to request,
yes, sir.
is that, could you send a copy of your PowerPoint presentation to us commission members? And we have the details of what we talked about tonight, because that would be very helpful.
Yes, we'll give you instructions for your homework. Absolutely, we can do that.
Yeah, the one thing I'd suggest, in a change to what you presented here, was where you talk about the chapter, put the title of the chapter on there as well.
There are a lot of things from the very beginning of this project that we talked about and we discussed. And sometimes as a commission, as a group, we would come to a consensus, hey, that's the way we would like to see it. And there were other times we said, well, it's getting too complicated or it's getting too confusing. Let's refer to staff. Staff, you get together with the city attorney if you need to, talk about it, and come back with your recommendation. I'm sure those recommendations and those kind of comments are going to be reflective in the clear copy of this. And in defense of Lee, what he's saying is very important because a lot of those things we have not seen since our initial comments and how they were actually worded out. So they may seem substantive to us, but I think we need to trust you to make that call. And we're not going to be bashful. I know, I know we're not.
No, you will not. No,
Just curiosity, how many total pages are we talking?
no idea. I don't know how many. Well, no, and Jen and I talked about this earlier today. She said,
Yeah.
gonna ask.
I said, I don't know how many pages we're at, and someone's gonna ask us, so.
But we can't tell you how many pages our current code is either. The chapters vary in length. Like chapter one's what, like,
Well, just
Yeah,
before we
9,
walk
10
out of here and agree
pages.
that, hey, we're gonna review this thing soup to nuts in the next 10, 11 days. If it's 476 pages, I'm gonna caveat that.
no, it's not that
If
many.
it's 47 pages, I can agree to that. Yeah.
That's more like what, 200, Jen-ish? She's nodding yes, she's
Okay.
muted.
Sorry, I couldn't get to the mute button because I was opening code sections. I think we're around the 200 page realm.
So it's like a novel,
Chap- Yeah.
Yeah.
a really boring,
Remember the
sleep-inducing
original draft
novel.
This thick.
And it should be,
I don't know that it got a lot shorter. It's different. I mean, so we,
It's easier to read,
Yeah.
a clean copy, you bet it is.
yeah.
Cause you kind of have to read it twice. Once it's go through and familiarize it with everything is, and then the second time you could go, oh, wait a minute, that's disconnect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And most importantly, I really want to say thank you guys for all of your dedication to this project. I recognize this has been an amazing time commitment on your part. Even if you've only attended work sessions here or there, it's still evenings that take you away from your family or hiking or otherwise recreating and enjoying life. So it's definitely been an investment by all of you. I really appreciate it. And then, of course, the other piece of this is I've got a little bit of a time clock in the back of my head that I lose some of our key members off this planning commission that have been part of this for the past couple of years because of term limits. That's on the horizon. So that's part of where I'm sorry, I got to keep this moving. Because otherwise we really are starting over. And you're probably going to need to start over with a new director because at a certain point, I mean, I love working here and being a part of all this, but at a certain point, you can only go around the block so many times.
Would it be possible to get a hard copy?
Yes, I will put you down for one of those.
Okay. Double-sided's fine.
So,
You know, I find reading a hard copy in a notebook, writing my notes in the margin, then going back and doing my co-view,
That's how I often do it, when we get our homework.
makes the process much easier.
yeah, I've had, I was in my email to you all, to let me know if you wanted a hard copy. I've had four requests for that so far, so you were number 4. So if somebody wants one, just let me know and we'll fire up the printer.
Okay, thanks.
Don, are you still there?
He's there, he's been nodding along.
Oh, okay,
His picture is there.
Oh, yeah, I'm still here.
okay.
Any concerns, comments, thoughts? Yeah, he's not replying, so I'm guessing he's good.
Yeah, everything that's been said tonight I agree with. I think that, we're at that point where, we just need to look at what's presented right now. You guys have done really good work on getting it, put together, hopefully into something that we can take a look at and give you some feedback by the 7th, so that, the 10th we can, take a look at it and move it on to, a final product.
So thank you all. That's all I had for y'all tonight. Mr. Chair, anything?
I trust there's no reports.
I got nothing. I'm neglecting my team. I can report on that because I've been focused on this. CJ's, yeah, he's nodding. Yeah, he's got developers chomping at him.
We should have any comments?